Once you do it, and once you're in an environment that will make you more happy, that will make you thrive, you will realize how worth it is. So I know it's scary, it's risky as well, financially, but it is worth it if you're a really strong believer of this vision, and it's something that passionates you really to your guts. It's you should do it, because it will change your life. It will change your happiness, in fulfilling your dreams. It will never be easy, but it's better to do that change and work your hardest towards something that will bring you happiness,
Right.
that they're not doing it. So it's worth it to believe in your dream, and taking that leap of faith.
Got it.
There were a lot of adjustments, I'm sure, as you can think of, between two complete opposite worlds.
Right.
There are some similarities: the rigor, the hard work, your capacity to adapt, which I think are necessary to take on this new venture. But the challenges are really, it's to knock on many doors. I didn't know many people in the fashion industry, and you have to meet a lot of people, talk about your passions, your project. You have to convince manufacturers to produce for you when you start. You don't have the minimum quantities for to attract any new manufacturer. So the manufacturers need to believe in your vision and believe in you long term when they start your collections, producing 5, 15, 20 pieces, which is not a lot for them. And also, it's doing a lot of the trade shows. We have the chance in France to have trade shows where most of the fabric suppliers come to, even some manufacturer. So that allowed me to meet a lot of our partners. But then it's really a challenge every day as a young brand, and even today, it's continually trying to find, if the first option is not possible, a plan B all the time, and really adapt, and find solutions by working hard, by meeting in the right people to help you as well. So social media helped me a lot. It's a very easy way to meet people, to reach out to people, and to see what's happening. And I think the other important part was the human touch. I'm very curious to meet new people, exchange with them, and connect on a human level. I really enjoy it. So it could go in the opposite way of social media, which lacks the human touch. But I think if you use both of them and to complement each other, it's a great way to meet new people. I was new to the fashion industry, so I was very curious to meet designers, stylists, people that work in also in manufacturers. So we have a lot of manufacturers in Portugal, and I started by producing a lot of jersey. So I decided to travel to Portugal to meet them in person. I think it's very important for the manufacturers to trust your vision and to see you and meet you. So that was very important in convincing them, in following and trusting the vision. So I think it's a mix of social media, which helped me a lot build a platform and have a voice, and also my curiosity and how I enjoy human interaction. There's also a touch of eccentricity in my collections. I love to mix different worlds, because it it's a result of growing up, from having friends from different religions, different ethnicities, in my own household, having different origins. And I love to mix the vestiaire of sportswear, of tailoring, of workwear, all together in the silhouettes, and add some references that will put a smile on people's face. And that's, I think, my responsibility as a designer, is to bring joy and happiness to people when they see my collection, when they see the cutters, when they see the models, and how all the collection comes together throughout the shows. It's something that it's really important for me. Be very audacious in what you do, in your choices, and make no compromises. If you want to change fields, do it. There's no limit, and to what you shouldn't put yourself any limits. It needs to be true to where you want to go, true to yourself as well. Never be somebody that doesn't represent yourself. And if you're honest with your vision, you're audacious, and you're patient, because patience is very important. It takes a lot of time. Even if you see some overnight successes, there's so much work that goes into it that you have to be patient. But for me, if I had to pick one of the advices, to be audacious. It's very important in today's world to make no compromises, and have a very precise vision. It's important to have a direct message and a DNA that's I'd say the word obvious when you look at it. So if it's colorful, it needs to be colorful. Choose one message and keep on pushing that same message and vision. And also within your images, it needs to be only your brand in the image. That's very important. Also, repetition is very important. Don't ever hesitate to repeat yourself, repeat some images as well, because it takes time for people to understand. And our role as well as fashion designers is to create garments that last for a long time. That is very important now. And we've seen it here in France with the success of vintage stores. People are dressing more and more with vintage clothing, but those garments have lasted for decades. Those are durable garments. If you look at a Levi's jeans or a Brooks Brothers shirts, 20 years old, it's our responsibility to create garments that last for several seasons, that can be passed down as well. That's a great way as well to show consciousness for this environmental issue that is going to continue being, that should continue being our focus for the next years, because we're not yet close, unfortunately, to have found a solution.
So music has always been a big part of my life. And even before that, I was in Miss Saigon in the West End here. And I think from then on, I always enjoyed performing and music. So my parents asked me if I wanted to learn how to play anything. So yeah, from the age of 7, I learned piano and violin, did that my whole life, like up until now. And then I went to the Brit School and met more musicians, and that's kind of how I started session musicianing. Like, I didn't know that was a career that I could pursue, but I met lots of other musicians and started playing with them, started doing different gigs. I even went to uni, but I did accounting. I think lots of people, especially from like conservative backgrounds, don't really know what creative jobs are out there. So from my perspective, I only ever saw the artist. So like the main artist, I was never like, I didn't really notice the band around them, or like say the producers that make the, or songwriters that make the music. And so when I went to the Brit School, that was the first time I realized, oh, there are lots of other jobs within like the music industry and creating music. So yeah, from then on, I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. When I was younger, I was so adamant that I wanted to be an artist, but as I've got older and exposed more to the industry, I think that slightly changed. I kind of like being a session musician and being a producer because there's not that pressure that lots of artists seem to face with like being a social media presence and always having to have content and always having to listen to so many different people's opinions, and like working with different labels isn't very easy because you have to choose the battles that you fight, like in terms of your music, and there's lots of compromise. Whereas like being a musician like I am, or like producing stuff that I like, I have a lot more freedom. The best advice that I've ever received is from Roger Taylor and his musical director. And they were just like, just say yes to everything because you never know where these opportunities could lead you. Um, Sometimes we can be timid to say yes or hesitant, but just say yes because you won't regret saying yes, but you'll probably regret the things that you didn't do. I grew up listening to such different music. I grew up listening to what my parents played, which was like Motown or like, you know, Filipino karaoke. So we love some OPM tunes. But pop music was always a really big thing growing up. Um, so I guess because I listen to such a diverse range of music, that helps me adapt to the different projects that I do. And now I'd like to think that I am more selective in terms of the kind of artists that I play and work for, because I always want to enjoy the music that I'm playing every night, and I want to, you know, be supportive and be part of something that I'm passionate about because I feel like that will translate. I guess I just want to really enjoy the music that I'm playing, and I want to know that the music means something to people. So, for example, like with Maisie Peters, she's such a great songwriter at the age of 22, but every lyric is so like specific and so precise, like nothing's throwaway. Like everything she writes is well thought out, and that really translates to her audience. And so that's the kind of thing that I look for in terms of artists, where they're really passionate about what they do. I just always want to have a creative outlet. So obviously, being a session musician, I'm always playing other people's music, but I find that I definitely need to have some sort of outlet for myself and a way that I can express myself. So I always like to do other projects, and write for different things. Like I started writing for like adverts and that kind of thing, which is really exciting and it's a different skill. Um, but yeah, I just always want to have different things and different collaborations with people because I love creating music with other people as well. There's just a lot more music that's being released into the world. Some people might think that's a bad thing, but I think that's a great thing because um, everyone likes different types of music. So I feel like now there's so much for us to explore and like discover in terms of new music, and we can inspire different people that we've never been able to reach before. So I think it's amazing that everyone has the opportunity to create and release their own music, whether it be through like TikTok has become a massive thing where people put their songs there and they kind of explode, which wouldn't have been able to happen before if we didn't have social media. It's great that people can kind of just make music at home and teach themselves. I think that's amazing. But I don't think we should belittle like the professional training that people go through. Like there are so many talented musicians out there, like John Mayer, Jacob Collier, and they're real trained musicians that have worked their lives to be the best at what they do, and that really shows in their music. And I feel like that can only push you further, and like in terms of your ability. So I still think it's really important to have training. When I was younger, I was really introverted and found it hard to be in social situations, especially with new people. But touring and having to constantly meet new people and being with people all the time really changes you as a person, but in a good way. Like, I think I realized everyone's in the same boat. Everyone's a bit socially anxious. Um, but, if you're passionate about what you do and you're a nice person, that's like my biggest advice. You just got to be a nice person so that people remember you in the best way, and people are more likely to recommend you for other things, because touring as a session musician is like 50%, I say, like how well you play, and the other 50 is just being easy to get on with, because you spend so much time with people. Like, living on a tour bus is really intense, so you just got to be considerate to everyone that you're with, and if you're just like a nice person to hang out with, then people will want to hang out with you more, and they'll recommend you to other people. If I was feeling uninspired, I would call some of my musician friends and kind of express that and be like, is this normal? Is this how you're also feeling? And yeah, everyone was in the same boat. So I guess that was kind of good to know that it's normal to feel that way. As I've got older and realized what happiness is and success is to me has changed so much. So I think being able to work with artists and make music that I'm passionate about, something that I care about, and also being around a team that I really love and that really love me, that's what I see as success, because that's what makes me happy. I'm getting paid to do it, and I really enjoy the music that I'm making and playing. So I guess my end goal is to just keep doing this for the rest of my life. Yeah, that's what success is to me.
Really hard to live ethically right now. It's like something I think about all the time, right? Like, simply by living your life, like, you already having to make all these really complicated ethical calculations, right? Even if you're not like a creative worker. And then I think it's like heightened if you are a creative worker, because then you're really having to engage with these things in like a very intentional way. There's a really great talk actually by an artist and researcher that I really admire at the same conference that I gave the talk How to Do Nothing at. I think you can find it if you just Google design for know nothings. It'll probably come up. But it's this amazing talk that I heard in 2016. And I remember that it sort of gave me like permission to be this way, where she is, the person giving the talk was also an interdisciplinary person. And she talked about these figures sort of in history who kind of like invented a discipline. So like the first social worker before we had the phrase social work, or Jacques Cousteau, who was like a diver, not a scientist, but what he wanted to do led people to invent all these new devices. So like, she's kind of talking about these people who don't fit into any particular category. And that is the important thing about them. They made something new because they were kind of in that, like it's basically her saying like, no, it's a good sign. If you can't easily categorize yourself, it's not a bad sign. But I remember at the time I really needed that, because there's so many structures, having to sell your work, but also having to talk about your work, that it feels like it would be much easier if you could just say, I do this, 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 and the other person's like, great, I get it. I sort of know a lot of people who have tried to like create their own quasi-institutional structure, like create like an organization, or create like a residency or something like that. It's never like a lot of money, obviously, and it's always a struggle, but it does create this ecosystem so that it's not just a bunch of individual artists. It means that like they can come together in these like configurations and get resources from those programs. And some of them, are like, they end up being successful and they're very long running. So I think that that's kind of interesting to me in terms of like, there's something in between just individual people alone and institutions. There's like another layer that's possible, and it's not an easy one, but it requires a lot of initiative. Like, it requires people to like have the courage. If you read How to Do Nothing, I have a lot of complicated feelings about social media, but I feel like one of the things that concerns me about it, that sort of relates to this, is that it's become kind of like the de facto way that people connect. And it's a very particular way. of connecting. It's often like a broadcasting kind of thing, and it could be really great, for exposure and things like that. But I feel like sometimes social media makes it seem too easy to like make these connections, and like being maybe more intentional and being like, no, I'm actually just going to have this like group chat or whatever, or we're going to have this like weekly meeting, or just some kind of like more intentional, just group focused, like smaller thing where it's not about you broadcasting to an audience. It's about you exchanging ideas with other people and like being inspired and like helping each other solve problems, because like that's what I feel like I don't get from social media. And you get it in school. Like that's the thing. I remember having that in school. So like when I left grad school, it's like, okay, how can I like find that? And it turns out that you just have to like make it, like you just have to like build it yourself. I owe a lot to Twitter in terms of like, I have posted things there, and like that is how people found out about them. I think like I just try to think of it as like a tool, and different tools do different things, right? And then like there are things that Twitter and social media in general are really good at. And like one of the things they're really good at is like spreading information very quickly and very widely, and also maybe getting someone's attention. Then there's like things that they're really bad at, like having a really nuanced political conversation or something, right? So it's like, I think just, and then being aware that even if you know that when you go into that space, that it's designed to be very seductive. So you just have to be aware of that. I want to imagine that Twitter is like a book on my shelf. And when I want it and I need it, I take it off the shelf. I open it, I get what I need, I close the book, I put it back on the shelf. It's easier said than done, but yeah. There's nothing sanctified about institutional education. Like I can tell you that having been in it, like it's just information. It's definitely, they make it harder for you to access. Again, easier said than done. It's not a park, and it's not a meeting space, and it doesn't have like those benefits. But I do think that if you it's almost like you're putting on a filter where you're like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to look for these things, or I'm going to be attentive to these things. And I'm often just, I've lived in the same place for a really long time. I still see things that I am very surprised by. My sort of definition of success for a creative person is like, it's actually very simple. It's like, if you successfully made a connection to another person and like you communicated what you wanted to communicate. I mean, that's a miracle, right? Like we're all individual people. If you can write or create or whatever, articulate something from a feeling that you had or an observation that you had, and someone else can encounter that and they can feel something similar, or they can imagine something similar. Like, I don't know, that's like, I don't know of anything like more profound than that. And like, I say that that's my measure of success and not these other things, because I think it is possible to become successful in the kind of traditional way and actually not have made those connections, right? Like hype is a very interesting thing to me. When something gets hyped and people are encountering it and they're sort of like maybe like judging it, and it's just sort of feels very competitive. Like, well, it's like, did anyone actually make any connections in that? Like, I don't know, maybe. So I feel like I don't know I don't remember what the message was or the circumstances, but whatever was the first time someone told me that they read How to Do Nothing and they like felt these things, or they were like, I felt these things for a long time, and then you put them into words, like that, it was successful. Like it would have already been successful. It doesn't really matter what happens after that. So yeah, that's my definition of success.
Yeah, I think having a brick and mortar restaurant, because I've had experience as a young chef, maybe 10 years working in kitchens, moving my way up to become an executive chef. It helped me understand that having a space isn't as important to me. And it's about having these relationships that I can contribute to, and communities that I help build imaginative futures with. So, there's a lot of difficult news that happens globally. And in the experience of being a Filipino person of diaspora, being raised in America, an idea of like sort of future building against the difficulties and challenges of the world that we belong in now is trying to dream up these spaces and create communities of care and free expression, and try to create and produce an envisioning of that. So if I have an idea of a world that I want to belong to, it's in my interest to produce something that way, or work with people to communicate that as well. So when I mentioned that my work is transdisciplinary, I mean that I work with all kinds of folks. I think about my work and communicating in a variety of ways. I don't feel siloed to one specific discipline or industry. And I feel like that allows me a sort of freedom to also share what might be possible for a young person or a person that's interested in many things. Actually, I don't necessarily mix my hospitality background with specifically food in these nightlife spaces, but they are important to me. I think one thing that we're both talking about is this production of these experiences within spaces. And for example, the club, we have our party, and our party is called Gush, and it really centers this idea, this more like abstract version of like lesbian or sort of sapphic relationships that can be non-binary, can be queer, can be trans, and that can all coexist together. For BIPOC folks, I love our club. It's that we have our residency, which is nowadays, and they use language where they say they can promise a safer space. So instead of this really firm black or white or binary of like safe and unsafe, it allows there to be accountability of everybody that walks in to contribute to something that could feel safer than anywhere outside of the space. And so it allows people to come in with an attitude of like collective care for each other in the space, and that your actions directly relate to what other people's experiences are. Creativity comes from the same place of even just like a food craving. You have this desire, and I think even your sexuality of like how you want to express it, you ideally you have space to think about your needs, and you're like, oh, I'm actually hungry, or oh, like I like crave an intimacy, whether it's romantic or not, or I feel like I have this idea that I want to harness. You can think about collective care in many different ways with aspects of like food and nightlife. For me, it's rooted in a privilege that's pleasure oriented. For me, creating a space that's like a $15 party monthly is a space for you to recharge and feel joy. I really want to emphasize that pleasure is a privilege. We don't all get to experience pleasure the same way and buy pleasure the way that you would with food or with these nightlife spaces even. But I think it does emphasize that we should make room for pleasure and joy. And so there's many expressions of how we can experience pleasure and joy. And it might be like seeing a beautiful illustration that has a message of future like utopias that we can create. It could be a practice that's rooted in illustration for social justice causes. That's the hard thing about us existing in this time of like white nationalism and imperialism and capitalism, and that sadly a lot of that is rooted in historically in Christianity and erasure. And that's the time that we were born in. These are indoctrinated thoughts. I have, there's aspects of a religion that I really believe in, and think like the spiritual aspect of religion, I think is really beautiful. But I think, again, there's this disconnect to humanity and caring for the world or thinking about the earth. And yeah, so making these choices on the daily are really hard. That's the time that we exist in now. And I think as long as we are trying to make conscious efforts on what we participate in as much as possible, I think we're doing what we can. But it is a hard decision to make, I think, often. And I think in order, in order for us to have a balance, it's like thinking also hopefully about how to invest in communities of like, yeah, just contributing what we can to community as well. I think that there is a lot to be said about blurriness. And I talked earlier about liminal spaces. And I always talk about like queer non-binary thinking in anything. And I think it just allows for expansiveness. It allows value in your individual work. It allows in this exchange that can happen with your skill set. I think a microcosm of that is this guild that I belong in, and that all of our experiences and interests can collide in a way that, maybe thinking about like indigenous communities bartering. It could be like a bartering of ideas and supporting each other's work. When I think about these indigenous communities existing, where one person is raising cattle for milk and meat, or one person is the caretaker of children, is skilled at that, or one person is a person that's growing vegetables or weaving tapestries. I think it's just a model to look at and see how we can reflect that through our different disciplines and the merging of them. I think it's a source of also a requirement of us finding like joy and safety at this time. So yeah, that blurring and these like liminal spaces, I think, are really important to feel free in.
Cooking started at a very young age. My mother, Herminia Constantino, was the one who inspired me to be a cook. After I graduated high school, she helped me get into culinary school. And then years later, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and it was devastating. Also, like she wanted to pass down her recipes to me, and that started my journey to become a Filipino chef / cook. And so that developed my repertoire, my recipe book for Filipino, because that was my genesis, my beginning in this type of cooking. And then a year before Bad Saint opened, she passed away. So after she passed away, like this food, these recipes became very personal to me, extremely personal, and so I started working really hard at them, started practicing every single day to master her recipes. Culinary school teaches you a lot of the fundamentals of cooking in terms of like using a scale, how to clean, how to purify a stock, how to have discipline. That French discipline is very important to me because it teaches you how to be clean, it teaches you how to be methodical in a kitchen / restaurant. They teach you how to work under pressure. And when you put the two together, like it taught me how to run a 600 square foot restaurant, which was Bad Saints, and it taught me how to be in control of my situation. It's also, my mom also gave me discipline, how to feel for Filipino food, how to feel the soul, like when you're cooking this type of cuisine, because you can't just like start cooking this cuisine without knowing the nostalgia, without knowing the feel, the soul of like why this cuisine is so important. She made it extremely personal for me to understand the love and care we put in this, the love and care she puts in this food. My chefs taught me how to be better in the kitchen. They taught me how to, I developed like this tough skin by giving a shit and also not giving a shit at the same time, depending on situations. It was all about just training your mind, your mentality, and like Chef Andres gave me that. Also, Chef Jonathan Sinnigan, he taught me how to just like, hey, don't take it too seriously. Like it's just food. He knew I love this food. I love to cook. You just need to take your time and make sure it's right. Well, a mistake is something that you will recover from, something you will say, yes, I would dust myself off and try again. A failure is someone who is lazy tamad, who just doesn't care anymore. Who just just says I give up. Being in the kitchen is all about attitude. It's all about having the right attitude and telling yourself I'm going to try again. I'm at the point right now where people need to appreciate everyone's cooking and not compare it all the time and say, oh, it's better. Oh, I was disappointed because this is the problem with our community, is because people people just don't know how to accept everyone's food, accept everyone's technique. And I think what restaurateur or business chef needs to do is just follow your heart, follow your adobo, follow your sinigang, follow your pinakbet, and just go from there. If you want to expand your knowledge, start reading Cloud Tayag's book, Lanam Nam, Amy Besta's book, Memories of Philippine Cuisine, Culinaria. There's 7,000 Islands. There's Brian Coe for Milk Your Pigs. Like, these guys have inspired me to go above and beyond normal thinking when it comes to Filipino food. There were so many times where I peak nirvana when cooking a particular dish. Like, it's all about the creative process. It's like, you get this idea and you train to make this idea happen, and then you'll go through the flaws because you want to make it right, but then there's always something missing, and then you start saying to yourself, this is only 70% right, and you have to figure out like the other 30% why it's why, what we can do to make it correct, to get that other 30%. So it takes time, it takes weeks, it even takes months or years. Like, I've been working on sauces for years, and I don't know if you guys ever noticed at Bad Saints, I made a burnt coconut sauce for our radishes, and it took me months to learn how to do that, and I finally made it happen. It finally reached nirvana, where like the sauce became what I wanted for the sauce to become was not a sauce but a paste. And by accident, I threw it in the fridge, and the next day it became thickened. It became like it seized, and I realized this is exactly what I was looking for. So a lot of things, like I said, the creative process. There's a lot of things that you don't know that happens by accident, and then you start learning from your mistakes. You start learning from like your direction starts to change, and you start to think, okay, this is the direction I want to take now. There's so many factors when cooking in a restaurant, because we take it so personal, and we want it to be perfect, almost perfect. So it's like a never-ending battle.
Everything that I did in my life, waiting tables, wiping elderly's bottoms, work abroad in it led me to this point, right? And every bit of it helps. I guess the majority of it is my accounting background, right? So even in Hong Kong, when I worked there, I was moonlighting as an internal auditor for JP Capital Finance. It's a Japanese firm. Same with Inside Fashion. I was sales and marketing there, and also in Hong Kong. Teeny tiny bit, but again, majority of it is accounting because I know budget. So going back to my just being an ordinary audience member on Broadway, I'd sit there, of course, transported, and of course during intermission, I would say, okay, if this were my business, what would be my expenses? What would be my revenue? So I started counting the cast. I started counting how much they changed the costume, how many times the set evolved, or the source of the lights, how many seats in the theater, and in what capacity during the 8 times performances per week would they recoup. I was like, oh my God, I'm going crazy. That's part of accounting. And yeah, just the business model. If I were an entrepreneur, this is my business, how am I going to make money? So that's the major part of it. So I know budget, I know the recoupment, so I can do it in my sleep. There are 41 Broadway theaters, and I know if when they pitch to me, like, I just gotta give example, Frozen, the musical. just pitched for like $35 million and at St. James Theater. I said, oh my God, I can't see recoupment in 5 years here. So, so that was it. I always go where there could be a potential money for my investors because I take care of my name. That's the only thing that I have, right? I don't care if you have Jesus Christ in your cast. If it's not going to make money, it's not going to make money. You have to know what you're doing. Right. Yeah, anybody could be a producer, no doubt about it. Because look at me, right? I didn't go to I didn't study producing. I didn't study filmmaking. I didn't study any of it. It's just because of probably I've enriched myself with experiences. Cover the bases, know what you're doing, even the basic on how to start a production, right? Like if you know a good script, where do you take it? Who do you talk to? Who not to talk to? And all those things. And also you have to be sort of persuasive or in terms of fundraising. Because if you're shy, if you can't sell anything, you can't, I'm sorry, but you can't be a producer, because the major part of being a producer is bringing resources to the project. That's basically it. In no matter shape or form, but mainly finance. So you gotta have to be confident in selling the project, that in your sleep you can recite what it's about. Any question from A to Z you can answer. If you don't know, be honest about it and just say, I'll get back to you. Right. But make sure you get back to them, because that's when people will think of you as serious, and you're really in there for good. And the other thing is the compassion. You have to be compassionate on not just on the project, but with the team. You gotta know everyone in what they do. I've experienced some people back home where their egos are so much bigger than the cultural center. That's not gonna fly, because respect is earned, it's not asked. So you gotta have to give value to everyone in every level of the production. I hear about these horrors that filmmakers die there because of the dire situation of constantly working 24 hours straight, or even 48. That's gotta stop. Yeah, because like here we have unions. When it's lunchtime, everybody stops. Nobody works overtime and all that. As long as your project is good, I don't mind being your ally at all. I can take it to the finish line if it's good. If it's not, I have to tell you, and you get a man up and be man about it, to take criticism, just to better. Yeah, don't take it personally, because I'm here to help, but not geez, you want, because like me, I don't want to take any project to a distributor and the distributor will tell me, oh my God, Jet, I can't believe you recommended this film. So it bounces back to me. It reflects my credibility. Why am I recommending this film or this project? So yeah, I'm being very careful with my credibility, because that's all I have. Somebody has to be a Mickey Lee of the Philippines. If you don't know Mickey Lee, you got to look her up. But just a brief, she's the granddaughter of Samsung, who comes from a cosmetic and electronic conglomerate. So 40 years ago, she was sought by the then up-and-coming Steven Spielberg to meet, and then she wrote him a check from that pitch, $300 million. And out of that investment, gave birth to SKG Group, who gave birth to DreamWorks. And Mickey Lee did not stop there. She opened up a live entertainment company, CJ&E. So somebody has to be, this is why also I keep going to the Philippines and trying to sit down with our well-to-do people there that maybe are possible Mickey Lee. If I were Japanese or Korean or Singaporeans, some billionaires from those countries would have probably invited me, sent me a private jet, took me to their place, and have a meeting and say, okay, what can we do? right? So it's just it's a fantasy of mine that somebody from the Philippines would do that. We need a robust push for our film industry, and again, no shortcuts. No shortcuts. Quality stories. Not I'm sick of poverty porn. I don't want to be left to the stigma of the rest of the world that we're all about poverty porn. It's not that. No, we've had that. That's enough. There are so many ordinary stories that we could make them extraordinary. It's about the storytelling and what we put in it and who we put in them.
Exhibitions, whether they are at a pop-up space, a non-traditional space, or at a museum, it involves a lot of people and a lot of critical contributors. I would say it's very collaborative in terms of working with the artists. It's a lot of conversations, right? You have to think about, working with a co-curator, you really have to understand, to have a solid, vision together that represents both. I think it's a give and take, but it represents your ideas. It represents, your vision and your approach. So, sometimes, you have to pull back a little bit. Sometimes you have to also give in. You want to be able to do the work that that feels natural to you, or that is interesting to you, that you want to follow through. Sometimes not all of it gets to be seen or exhibited, but I should say to artists, to commit, to your interest, or to commit to your questions rather. What are some of your questions? What are the questions that you are looking, that you're asking, and how can you respond to those questions? What is the form or shape or, or format that exploration takes place? And I would say, to be open to, critical conversations, but I would, just, you can't please every single person that comes in. You can't be all these different kinds of artists. For one show you're this, and then for the next show you're this, and then for the next show you're this. Like, I think growth is important, but it has to make sense. You have to really follow that kind of pursuit. I think that is so individual. I think in the last 5 years, I've done one show a year. So it's not, I'm not super prolific. And so it takes time, right? So I think curating is such a slow process that you really have to give it time. It's a lot of reading, it's a lot of researching, it's a lot of conversations, like long-term conversations. I was going to say, some of these relationships, with artists can take a long time before you even think of the best, or the, of an exhibition that makes a lot of sense, or that they would include it, so you always want to keep those relationships going. You always want to keep those conversations going, think about where they're at. I'm always, figuring out, what do I want to say? I want to say, first, put yourself out there. I think it's really important to make sure that your work is easily accessible to curators, to other people, to people who might be interested, right? So making sure that there are, pathways and avenues that make your work easily available. In terms of building relationships, I think you really have to nurture those. Slowly and quietly, without expectations. I think sometimes people you want those quick returns, where it's like, oh, I have something to show you, included in an exhibition, or like, what's your next exhibition? So it can feel transactional. But I think when you are, deeply interested in your work, it shows up, right? So when you are excited to share about your work, I'm excited to learn about your work. When you show a real connection, like to that process or to the ideas, that gets me excited as well. Without kind of all of the art terms, or all of the kind of veneer of like, art world speak. Sometimes, I feel like you don't have to impress, but you have to just be open and transparent, and ask questions. Being able to recognize that and understand that there is power in collectivity, and recognizing that each of us work, in our own way to bring, our stories, our voices, our experiences to the forefront. And so, without without artists, there would be no curators, and no bookmakers. Without books, without writers. What are we good at individually? What are we great at together? And how can we elevate that and push it out? I think there's so much possibility.
I think for people who are in a more senior creative position, it's easy to overlook the influence and the I guess the effect they have to more junior um, members of a creative team, and it's really that mentoring piece. I think really helps people thrive, um, and really provides other creatives the opportunity to feel empowered, to feel like um, they can make decisions, make mistakes, and learn from them. So for that to also happen, you have to also make sure that your own well-being is kind of taken care of. So you have to have that awareness that you're taking care of yourself, that you're taking care of your creative craft, and then I guess cascading that through mentorship and empowering your team. So I think I go back to the definition of design, which is really problem solving, right? We're trying to address a particular need in a particular community or a particular person, and internally, our creative team puts our community at the forefront. So when we're trying to um, uh, come up with creative ideas or provide value to our community, we really try to address their specific needs. What we've kind of proved also in the company, I think, is that Filipinos have world-class talent in design and in the creative space. A lot of we're very proud of the fact that we have a large creative team here in the Philippines, and those local teams here in the Philippines are actually making global impact. I think really focusing on people, their well-being, is really important, because seeing your own team thrive and really grow in their craft and their set of skills is a really good measure of success for a studio or an agency, because if you have really good people, that also translates to the work that your studio or your agency is doing, right? So if you're looking at actionable items there. It's about having that or instilling that growth mindset the people that you work with, having that growth and development framework, having growth and development opportunities for them to grow, to explore new creative ideas, and even just making mistakes, like in hopes that they would learn from their own mistakes. It's really about taking care of people. I think that's what you do as a leader, right? Uh, so, I mean, as a creative, that's also kind of true. Like, there's a people focus to design, finding needs that need to be addressed. Those are very people centric. Like solutions we try to find, ideas that we try to formulate. Those are with the spirit of actual people in mind that we want to help. And I think that also translates to being a leader, right? So what you learn as a creative when you try to come up with solutions and ideas, it's about helping other people. At the very root of it is you're trying to solve someone's problem or trying to address a need that they have. And when you become a leader, in the other people, empowering other people to be better and to grow.
My everyday is mostly in meetings with editors and writers, helping to shape stories, helping them to see the potential of written word as it turns into a visual presentation. And I think, the New York Times is one of the few but leading publications that really understands the impact of visuals in storytelling, especially as we dominate and look towards digital platforms. People want to be immersed in the story through photography, video, moving images, animation, typography, and the Times invests heavily in that kind of journalism. They believe that it's a differentiator. It's what makes the Times special over maybe other newspapers, certainly, or other magazines. And they have been investing for, I don't know, certainly almost 10 years now, which means that we still hire a lot of talent in those fields. And so my everyday is really just to make sure that sort of mantra is in almost every editorial meeting, that we don't just think about written words, but we actually think about, is there potential to use different mediums to help that story resonate. I like to say, once you work at a newspaper, anything else is pretty easy, because when you have to think about ideas that quickly on deadline, you can't be precious about it. You got to be able to blurt out even bad ideas. You can't worry and second guess yourself. You have to be very like, oh, what about this? What about this? And you can't be tied to it. So I spit out an idea and the editor is going to say, oh, that's terrible, or oh, that's great. And you can't be like, I'm out of ideas. You just have to keep going. So that was one of the biggest things that I learned, thinking quickly, collaborating, and honestly, mostly the biggest driving thing throughout my career is to think about the content first. Think about what the story is before you try to start to design it, right? What is it that you're trying to communicate? And I want to say, like, there's all different kind of design, all different kind of graphic design. And I am such a fan of all of those forms. Some of them are very personal. They're more artistic. They're expressions of one's self and interests and what you like, what you don't like. And I fully admire that work, but that's not necessarily the work that I do. My work is to solve a problem Yeah, it's the most important kind of skill set to be able to think of what your partner, how your partner thinks, and how you need to communicate to them. It builds trust, right? It builds the ability to say, it's not your ego that we're dealing with here. It's we both want to find common way to solve this thing that we're trying to build or create, right? And I hire people. I've hired so many people over the years, and the biggest thing I look for is, can they think like an editor? Can they, not only will that help them as a designer problem solve, but it will help them talk to others. It will help them talk to a writer and editor. Because, you know, I think both sides can be intimidating. I know a lot of editors that have told me, oh my God, the design process is so opaque. Like, it's a mystery to us how it works, right? And I think a lot of designers think, oh, I'm not a word person, I don't write, so I don't ever want to, it's not my place to tell them. Like, I literally almost every day say, I didn't understand, what's the point of that story? Like, asking questions is what we both should be doing, right? And so if I'm a designer who thinks like an editor, I read a story and I think about it, like, is the story well shaped? Is it well argued? Is it you know, is it easy to follow, right? Those are my number one instincts if you are putting together a portfolio, is to try to tailor it to the place that you are going to apply. Like, there's no such thing as a portfolio that just meets everybody's interest, right? So if you are like, I want to apply to the New York Times, right? You should be familiar with what the New York Times does and the kinds of stories they do. You should look at the kind of illustration, if you're an illustrator, the kind of illustration that they commission. And then you should try to look at your work and edit your work so that it feels like it's not too much of a jump. It still was problem solving. I still feel like today what I do is a lot of the same things I did with the Tribune, which was the story I described, sitting in that hot seat with editors behind you asking you have to solve a problem.
I think in the past year, I've had 3 different jobs, right? So I've done a lot of figuring out, like, what am I doing right now? And I think that for me, the biggest learning lesson from that is just that sometimes I think that as a creative, I've had to accept that, like, sometimes there are fallow periods and periods that I'm not producing as much, and I'm not as happy with the work that I'm doing. And I'm letting the ideas sit in my head and I'm not doing anything with them. And I think that part of making space to be creative to me is giving myself grace to not always be at 100% as a creative, which is hard because, like, as a creative, you want to always be doing the best work you can do. You want to always be producing. You want to show that, like, every story you are writing is just like a banger, right? And then, but I don't think that's the reality. And I think that, like, making space for myself is also just realizing that, like, it can't be that way all the time, but it doesn't mean I can't get back to that point, right? But I've also found it's really helpful for me to do other creative pursuits, like, get really into cooking, or like take pictures of my food and make videos of cooking, so I think all of those things, they circle around the same idea, right? Which is that I'm like a person who's very invested in food, but they're not necessarily like just one medium or one way of looking at things, which I think can burn, I would burn myself out if I were only writing. I was only thinking about writing. Yeah, so I've worked almost exclusively in digital media, right? And so I think that, like, traffic is definitely something that is a consideration. It's something that I, like, personally I don't like to be concerned with it too much. Like, I think that if my editors want to convey that type of information to me, they can, but it's not something I'm looking for personally. So I think that to an extent, as a writer now, especially working on the internet, you have to be aware of, like, what is the conversation. And I think you have to be open to the possibility of sometimes doing things that are clearly for SEO and are clearly for sort of like the internet zeitgeist. I think that, like, in my career, there's like been so many pieces I've done that are not things that, like, sort of appeal to me or are very, like, things I'm passionate about, but I did because they're sort of like it was good for search or it was good for the conversation. So I think that there is a way to build a career as a writer without thinking too much about data or the algorithm. I think that I just think that sort of a necessary evil, if you will, is that you do have to do some of that stuff that is like, for the algorithm, for the search, for, Google rankings and stuff like that. And I think I used to like resent it a little bit more, but I think that the way I look at it now is doing that stuff and being open to doing that stuff sometimes also just enables me to do the stuff I really want to do, which, to be realistic, sometimes the stuff I want to do is not the stuff that's like going to do particularly well on traffic or algorithms or anything like that. You working in digital media, it's like, is there an upward trajectory to being a writer, or should I move into like this part of the industry, like try to become an editor or try to do like, this thing that will have more, like upward growth potential, right? And I think like in doing these different jobs, that was sort of what I was figuring out. Like, do I want to do the path that makes sense from a like pragmatic standpoint, or do I want to do the path that makes me feel my happiest, which is when I'm just like 100% just focused on writing. And I think the thing I've realized is that like I'm actually my happiest when I'm 100% focused on writing. And so I think that has been like a big challenge that I've learned recently, just in terms of like, I've gotten to a fork in the road about like, what does career growth look like for me now? Probably the best advice I've like just gotten in general is to just like, to be very persistent about the types of stories that I want to do, and to not really like back down if someone says, if it hasn't happened to me a lot that people are like, there's no space for this idea. But, I think that just being empowered to feel like I can like push for an idea, and even if it feels niche or specific or not immediately relatable to everyone, just being told that I can like go for those types of stories and, and like make a case for why they matter, I think has been really like empowering. And, I've been really lucky to have editors who've made me feel that way. I think also just like, I think like not being afraid of my ideas is good. Like, I think that when editors make me feel like there is value to what I'm saying, and that I am qualified to do it, I think it's probably the best encouragement I've gotten from editors is just that like I can do it. Obviously, the like feeling of imposter syndrome is very real for some people, like including myself. And I think that, just being told that I have the capability and I don't have to wait, until this like amorphous time in 2 years when I'm a better writer to do something, has been good advice.